If you live in Michigan, chances are you'll have a boat someday. Likely that boat will have an outboard motor. Outboard motors are hard-working small engines. They run at very high RPMs and get put through a lot with all the seasonal and temperature changes. Today we're going to do some winterizing on a 15 horsepower Mercury 4-cycle engine. First thing you need to do is find a manual, a service manual. Take some time going through it, finding the ins and outs about your engine. Fill your fuel tank to the top, then add stabilizer. The stabilizer will help keep your fuel fresh and will ensure that your engine will start good in the spring. After adding the stabilizer, run the engine. This will get the stabilizer through the fuel system. Running the engine will also allow it to heat up the engine components so you can change the oil and the gear lube easier. Remove the battery for the winter. Store it in a warm, dry place. Charge it every month or so. Now with the engine warm, it's a good time to drain the oil. The plug is first removed or loosened with a socket wrench. Make sure you get the right size wrench on there so you don't strip out the bolt. All the oil is caught in an oil pan so it can be recycled. The lower unit is tipped up and then it's tilted at an angle to help drain some of the oil. Once it's been draining for a while like this, you'll have to tip the lower unit back down so you can get more oil out. The drainage of the oil takes a little while for it all to find its way out. Maybe a half hour or so to get most oil out. So now here's the motor down. You'll see more oil's coming out now. The next job is to locate the oil filter. Most of the time you can remove them with your hand. Otherwise you might have to get a wrench to take off the oil filter. There's a special wrench that you can hook right on the end of a socket, and that's probably the best way to go with those. There's not enough room to get a regular oil filter wrench in here like one you'd use on a car. Once the oil filter is removed, inspect the areas, make sure the gasket is not stuck on the engine. Clean all the dirty oil off and any engine fragments you can see, metal fragments. Now I'm looking for the seal here on the oil filter. Sometimes the seal will get stuck on the engine. Take a minute to compare the new oil filter with the old one to make sure your numbers are correct. Just a little difference could make a big deal later on with your... When you're installing your oil filter, get it snug and then turn it about 3/4 of a turn further. You never should use a wrench on your oil filter. It's not supposed to be very tight, just hand tight. The next thing you're going to want to do is check out your oil drain plug. Look at that washer there and make sure there's no metal fragments on it. Sometimes there's a magnet on the end you can wipe off. If the washer's bad, replace it. Now add some oil back in. This is what the manufacturer recommended for this oil, 10W30, but it's a marine grade. You always want to use a marine grade oil. They're a little bit different than automotive oil. So I'm going to add it into the oil fill area. Now it's time to check the level of the oil with the dipstick. It's critical that the oil level is correct. You don't want to overfill it or underfill it. I'm going to be checking this again in the summer once I start it up because more oil will go through the oil filter. Now it's time to change the gear lube. The gear lube's changed with a straight screwdriver, and a lot of times I use a pair of channel locks as well. There's an upper and a lower drain plug. You're going to remove the lower drain plug first. And the upper drain plug actually just is more of a breather, and you'll see the fluid start to come out here real slow. And when I remove the upper one, it's going to start to speed up because now air can get into the lower unit. The gear lube is a very important part of your boat. If the gear lube is milky or looks like there's water in with it, you might have a leak into your seals or into your lower unit gear lube. This should be warm as well. You try to do this when the engine's warm. It'll take a while to drain all this out. Now it's time to change the spark plugs. The spark plug wrench had to be modified. The socket wrench here had to be modified to fit into the engine. You can see it was kind of ground down here at the end. The spark plugs will need to be gapped sometimes. This one actually was right out of the package, but sometimes you have to gap them. You can find the gap information usually on the engine, right here on this tag. Otherwise, you have to look in the manual. Add some fogging oil to the engine through the spark plug hole to help prevent the cylinders from rusting. Just remove the spark plug, put the fogging oil in, and spray it for about 10 seconds. Once the fogging oil has been added, you can now put the spark plug back into place using a torque wrench. It's important to get the torque setting correct, as you can strip out the threads into the cylinder head, which can really be a big problem. The next step is to remove the fuel filter. The fuel filter is usually located somewhere in the fuel line after the gas tank. You'll be able to buy a fuel filter that's specific for this engine size. That's going to be really important. It's also important that the fuel filter is going the right direction. There should be an arrow on it. The arrow should be in the direction of the fuel travel. If you put it on backwards, it's not going to work right. It's hard to see the arrow there, but there's an arrow. The next step is to remove the prop. I usually put a 2x4 in there to help hold it, and then I remove it with a socket wrench instead of a crescent wrench, because that can strip it out. Once you remove the prop, it's a good idea to grease the prop shaft. This will help prevent rust and corrosion in there once it goes back in the water in the spring, plus over the winter. Another good idea is to check this intake. This is a water intake. If it's plugged up, your engine won't get enough water to cool it. Now I'm going to add the gear lube. The gear lube is very thick, and it's sometimes difficult to add it to the lower unit. You're going to use this pump to pump it up through the bottom, and then when it gets to the top and starts to come out the vent hole, then you'll know that you've added enough gear lube. This will take about 7.9 ounces. Your manual will tell you exactly how many ounces it will take. So for this engine, I won't be using the whole quart there. Once it starts to come out the top drain plug, I can put the plugs back in. I bought new washers for the back of the plugs just to make sure that I don't have any leaks. Well, there you have it. There's some winterizing of an outboard engine.